Hey guys, and welcome back to a new video. You wanted it and you will get it. A complete introduction to the brand new framework Android XR, which Google recently announced. I presented that in the recent Android news episode. Lots of people said they want a tutorial about that, just an introduction, how we can work with that, because Android XR, where XR stands for Extended Reality, that is a new framework that allows us to build both augmented and virtual reality apps. So this is the developer website here, where you can get an impression of what that actually is. So if you have some kind of AR, VR glasses, then you can use these to now use Android with these, with Android XR. You can then pretty much extend your reality with these Android UIs, or also build complete virtual realities. So that's the difference between augmented and virtual reality, where augmented reality just refers to your actual reality, to your actual living room being extended with some artificial elements, so the actual UI of your app, for example, where virtual reality is really a complete simulated reality with no elements of your real reality. In this video, I will just give you an introduction to what you need to do in order to start developing XR apps with a new Android XR framework. So specifically, this is the little sample app that we will create here. This is the special new XR emulator. You can see, you can actually see multiple apps at the same time. You can look around, and you just need to imagine that this is your view when you had these special AR, VR glasses. This is the book app that I previously made a course about here on YouTube. And this is the app that we will build in this video. So you can see we can actually have a little image slider here, which is what we will build. And you will just become familiar with all the new terms that this framework introduces. And the very first thing when you want to get started with that is that at this point, you need the Canary version of Android Studio, so specifically Meerkat Canary version 5 at least. So I have installed that here. If you click About Android Studio, you can see I have the Meerkat Canary 7 version installed, so you need 5 at least. So just search for Android Studio Canary version download, then download that. If when you're watching this video, this version is already stable, then of course feel free to use that. So that's the first thing we need to do. The second thing in order to start XR development is you need to go to this little settings icon here inside of Android Studio, inside of your Canary version now. Click on SDK Manager. So this is your manager where you can install add-ons to Android Studio, so certain SDKs, certain Google Play APIs, and you need to install two things here. On the one hand, you need to go to SDK tools and just update everything here where an update is available, specifically these Android SDK build tools. So make sure that it's actually using the latest version. So it should say installed and not update available. You should update the Android emulator, so you have access to the new XR emulator. You should keep the Android SDK platform tools updated. And lastly, this layout inspector for API level 31 to 36. So that is for actually inspecting the UI tree of an XR app. So just select all of these, then click update or apply, and Studio will download these new versions. Then after that, go to SDK platforms, and you need to scroll down to Android upside down cake, this one, and actually install this Google Play XR system image. So this will really just install the system image for XR development, so the Android operating system kind of for your emulator, so you can also use that. It can be that you might need to relaunch Android Studio after updating the SDK tools, so you see that, but then you should definitely see that. So just install that afterwards, and then you will be ready for XR development. So once you did all these steps, click OK, go to File, New Project, and we want to not create a normal phone tablet project here, but I want to click on the new option XR. That is what we want to do, a basic headset activity. Click that, you can see it's still in preview, so I'm pretty sure in future there will be changes to what you will see in the tutorial here, but this will perfectly give you a first impression of what will come in regards to AR and VR development for Android. So we can click Next. We call this, I don't know, Android XR intro or so, and then we can click Finish. And once that project was fully created, Android Studio has fully synced, you will see something like this. So just the main activity, which is familiar to you if you've developed Android apps before. But there is a lot of sample code that was generated with this initial project that we can go through step by step. But first of all, one more step you would need to do in order to also launch the app here is, of course, creating an XR emulator that I already did here. So such a special emulator, but that really works exactly the same as creating a normal phone emulator. So you would just go to your device manager here on the right, open that, and then here you can see all your emulators that you've set up. You would go to this add button, create a virtual device, and then you can filter for XR emulators. There's just one XR device, which you can then use. You would click next. You can set up certain configurations here under additional settings if you maybe want to increase the internal storage, increase the RAM it uses, and so on. So just set this up based on your needs and then click finish, and you will also have this emulator that I have. So before we actually get to writing new code or adjusting this code, let's first of all understand the code that was generated here. So on the one hand, you can see there are some new composition locals like local session, local spatial capabilities. Starting with the session, that in this example is, for example, used to either request the so-called home space mode or to request the full space mode. So those are two new concepts that Android XR introduces, and with the session, we can request that. So on the one hand, we have the home space mode, which is the mode that this emulator is currently running in. Home space mode pretty much just means that multiple apps are running at the same time. You can multitask between them. So you can see this here is a different app than this one that we will develop here in this video. But you could, of course, also just keep on launching more apps if you've installed these and place these somewhere next here or so. And then you can freely multitask between them by just shifting your head, or in this emulator by just holding down Alt and then moving your mouse. There are also some more buttons here on the right side of the emulator you can use to actually control the perspective here. So this one here is for moving. You can see you can just move where the camera is in the 3D space. Then you can use this one here to actually move towards or from these screens away. You can use this to rotate. This is actually the same as holding down the Alt key. And you can click this button in order to get to the initial position again. And just like a normal Android device, we also have these, the back button, the home button, and the recently used apps button. But we were left here with this home space mode, which this is currently running in because we can multitask between multiple apps. But what is a bit hard to see here, but there's actually a button inside of this app that we will build. And if we click this expand button here, then the app will expand in full space mode. Full space mode is pretty much the full screen for glasses. So you can see our other app disappeared because now our app that we've developed here will take the entire space of our, not screen, but of our glasses, our entire 3D space that we have available here. If you want your app to run in full space mode, so this one here, then it has to be built with Android XR specifically, because then it will really make use of all the capabilities that you possibly have with extended reality. So you could, of course, also make this a fully virtual reality that you display your UI in some kind of artificial 3D environment. Or you could, of course, just display this in your living room, bedroom at home, wherever you are actually wearing your glasses or your headset. Then here below the screen, you will again see this button, which we can click and then transition back to our multitask mode. You can see it will actually move our screens to different positions as before, but that is also cool because now I can show you how we can actually move those screens. So if we are back here in home space mode, then we can simply go to the edges of our app here and then drag the screens up. I think if you actually have a headset, then this simply works by performing some hand gestures. But here in the emulator, we simply have to click somewhere at the edges, and then we can simply move this somewhere else. I think this also works, yes, if we go to the edges, the corners, then we can also decrease the size of our screen. So if we do something like this, then you can see that'll also work perfectly fine to just change our app's dimensions. So much about these new two modes that Android XR introduces, the home space mode and full space mode. You can see by just retrieving the current XR session, we can use that object then to either request switching to home space mode or full space mode, which will happen by default when this expand or collapse button is clicked. Furthermore, you can see that the default setup here checks for whether the local spatial capabilities at current is spatial UI is enabled. So this pretty much just checks for whether we are in a full space mode Because if we are in full space mode, then we want to show this composable here with our lambda being set, to requesting the home space mode to switch back to the home space mode. Or if full space mode is not enabled or not supported, then we show this 2D content. So we will just display our app as a raw 2D panel kind of. Then you also see this subspace composable, which wraps our spatial content that is put in here. The subspace composable is pretty much just a composable that allows us to render 3D things in it. So here it's really just our screen. What's visible, that's just a big composable in which we are able to render these 3D panels in which we're able to render 3D models in, and all kinds of cool stuff. If we then go down a bit, or we take a look in this spatial content, which is only used for full space mode, then this pretty much is just a spatial panel. So a spatial panel is just simply a screen in 3D space. So just one of these screens here, one of our apps. And then what comes inside here is in the end the actual content of our app, of that specific panel in our 3D space. So specifically, we have a surface, which is already familiar to you if you've worked with normal Android development before. So that's really just the raw surface of our UI, the raw background. We can, of course, also change the color here if you want. And then we have our main content, which in this simple example is really just set to this hello Android XR text, which we will adjust shortly. But other than that, you also see that there is a so-called orbiter. So there are quite some new concepts that this introduces. An orbiter is in the end just some kind of, you can think of it as a context menu that is being placed around that panel, around that 3D panel. So if we take a look back in the emulator, that's really what we have in full space mode. So let's expand our app again, because only here we have access to this orbiter. Then the orbiter is in the end the menu that is being placed here between our actual surface and the edge of this white visual resize highlight. And in this case, this shrink icon is part of this orbiter, but you can really build whole menus with that are not shown together with our actual UI, but outside of it, to not clutter the UI, to just have a bit more visual highlighting of specific context related or specific menu actions on that screen. So it wouldn't only need to be a specific icon button like here, but you could also think of this like a menu bar here with multiple actions that the user could perform. We can then also use this composable here to just change the position of this orbiter. For example, we could place it at the bottom. If we then relaunch this, currently it is actually at the bottom. Let's see if that changes something, or if I just didn't update the app since I changed it back to top. Oh, never mind. This is actually the prepared app, of course, where I set this to bottom. But if we now launch the app that we've created here, then this is still the other app since we are in full space mode. But if we leave this again, then you can see this is the sample app that is created with a fresh new Android Studio project here that we've created that says Android XR, hello Android XR. Where we also have this expand button. If we click this, we also switch into full space mode, and then our orbiter is being placed here at the bottom. If we change this back to top and relaunch the app, then you should see what I actually mean. You can see there it is, it's launched, and go back to full space mode. And now it's actually being placed at the top. So just that you get a feeling for what this orbiter is actually for. Here with this spatial panel, what's maybe worth mentioning is that this is also the place where you can change the dimensions of your specific panel, of the panel for your app, which takes in this special subspace modifier. So this is not a normal compose modifier, but a limited one that you can use to, on the one hand, apply the dimensions of your panel, which is already applied by default, whether it's resizable, whether you can move it. You can see that was possible by default. And if you don't want that, you would simply remove those two modifiers. But other than that, building UI here is really nothing else than building composables. Of course, it depends a bit what you want to do. If you want to build any 3D heavy UI, then you will need more Android XR specific concepts. So it also supports placing 3D models, for example. If you're interested in that, let me know that below if you want a bit more in-depth tutorials. But this is really just an introduction where I want to go over the main concepts it introduces and just build the simple UI from before. Then if we scroll up and actually go inside of this 2D content, which is being shown in home space mode, then you can see this is really just a normal composable that is put inside of a surface. Currently it's a row that wraps our main content and this full space mode icon button. So just an icon button as well as just a text. And we now want to change this to have a little slider for our images. And for that, I will simply copy paste 5 of my sample images here to my drawable folder. Feel free to use any images you like, of course. I will simply paste these 5 images. So these are current images you see here, and these will be then used for a slider. So instead of this text here for our main content, we now want this to be, first of all, let's specify our pictures. So the actual images to display, which is a list of drawable IDs. On the one hand, Kermit, duplicate that a few times, and make this Kermit 2, 3, 4, and 5. So those are the available pictures we want to be able to display in our slider. And then we can actually place a horizontal pager in here. So a horizontal pager is pretty much just a compose layout that lets us, let's go back here, that lets us actually move this away, that lets us swipe or slide between such pages. One limitation of this emulator here is that it does not yet support real gestures here. So you can see if I swipe, the normal behavior of this pager would be that we also swipe through the pages. That doesn't yet work with the emulator here. Scrolling does work. That works via the mouse wheel, not via tapping. But I assume if you have a real headset for this, then you can swipe via hand gestures. That's something I haven't tried out because I don't own such a headset. But I can imagine that this works. But since this is in a very early stage, I assume that the emulator does not yet support that, but will in some time hopefully support that. So that's what our horizontal page is for. That needs a so-called pager state, which lets us control which current page we're on and so on. So we can create this pager state up here, set this to remember pager state. And here in these curly braces in this lambda, we need to simply put the page count, so how many pages we want to have. And that's simply the amount of pictures we have in our list. We can then place this pager state here in our horizontal pager, forward our modifier that we have of our main content. We might also want to hit Shift and F6 in order to rename this to something like image gallery. And then in here, we actually get access to the current page we're on, so the page index, and we can then use this to render our image with the right resource. So we have an image where we set the painter to a painter resource, and the resource ID is simply our pictures list at the index of our current page that we get. The content description, we can set this to null. We can set the modifier of this image to just fill the whole size of our screen. And what can we else do? We can set the content scale to content scale.crop so that every single image will really fill the whole bounds of our pager. And that's all we need for this image gallery. Let's see where this is used. So on the one hand, used here in main activity for our spatial content for full screen mode. Let's go to our image gallery here and just remove the padding since we want these images to fill the whole size of our panel and not be padded in any way. And we also want to position these little control buttons here in order to actually just control which page we're on. That happens inside of the image gallery, so we can really just place all of this in a box, for example. We can pass in our modifier here, include our horizontal pager inside of this box, which then doesn't use the same modifier, but just a modifier fill max size. And then inside of this box, apart from this horizontal pager, we can place 2 icon buttons. So on the one hand, an icon button to go back. So here, this would display an icon with an image vector that is set to icons auto mirrored .default keyboard arrow left. So the left arrow. And we give this a content description of previous, for example. Previous, we can then control the current page by clicking on this icon button. Here we do need a coroutine scope, which we can get with remember coroutine scope in order to animate a scroll to a certain page. So we can say scope.launch when we click this previous button, and we say pager state dot animate scroll to page, and we simply say we scroll to the current page -1, so just to the previous page. It's also important that we disable this button if we can't scroll to a previous image. So if we are on the very first image, then we would need to disable this. So we can set the enable boolean to something like pager state current page is actually larger than 0. So if we are at least on index 1, that means we can scroll back. Let's also give this icon button a background color. So colors, we can set to icon button defaults, icon button colors, and we set the container color to color.black. And then we get the same effect as you can see here if the icon button is enabled. Then the last thing that's left for this icon button is that we set a modifier and an alignment, and actually a little bit of padding as well. Let's set the alignment here to bottom start. So this is the previous button. We want to align this here at the bottom start, so here, and then also set some padding of, let's say, 16 dp. That's the previous button, so we can now copy paste this to also create the next button where we want to go to the next page. So we add one to the current page, and this one is enabled if the current page is actually less than our pictures that last index, because then that means there is still one more index at least to scroll to. The alignment here should be bottom end this time, and we want to show the keyboard arrow right. Keyboard arrow right, and change the content description to something like next. And then I think this is everything for UI. So we've used this here in our 2D content, which is for home space mode. But we also need to use this in our spatial content, where we actually also already set this here. So, yeah, right, because we renamed the main content that was already placed in both these. What is important is that we change this row here to a box in 2D content, because right now our image gallery would be put in a row layout together with this icon button. We don't want that. We want the button to overlap this. So we can place this in a box, make the image gallery fill our whole size without padding, the max size of that box. And then if we can show this button, then we do show this, but we also align it in the top center. So we simply align this full space icon button here. We can also give this a background color to highlight it a bit more. So we give this some colors. Actually, we need to do this inside of this button here. Let's rearrange that a bit. And we say colors. Oh yeah, it already suggests that. Perfect. So icon button defaults, icon button colors, and then set the container color to black. We might also want to do this for the home space, but no, it's actually not necessary, since if we are in full space mode, then the button won't be shown in our actual UI anyway. So if we expand this and go inside of full space mode, now the emulator is actually hang up. That happened a few times to me, that it also crashed. It is still in an early stage. Let me close that and simply relaunch this, and then we can try this out. So there we go. I relaunched the emulator, and now we actually see the app that we've built. This button here is not really aligned in the top end. Didn't I use that? Let's go back to our box from here, where the full space button is actually aligned in the top center. Yeah, on dump. Of course, top end. If we then relaunch this, then the button should move over here. And yes, it does. Perfect. If we now click this next button, then we can scroll through our images until there is no more left, that we can't click this button anymore, and we can again swipe back. And I'm pretty sure if you're actually running this on an actual headset, you can also swipe here with hand gestures or some kind of similar mechanism that the emulator does not yet support. We can switch to full space mode. Then you can see this is now really just for our app, and that also works perfectly fine in here. We can go back, and we can of course also launch other apps by going back to the home screen. I don't know why there are no apps. Okay, we need to swipe. And for example, we can launch the Bookpedia app, which is then being placed here. We can move this up here. We can again hit home, swipe, and launch my XR Prep app. So that is the same app as we've built. We can move this over here, and then we can freely take a look of all of our XR screens. We can swipe our pages here of this demo app. We can swipe them here. Up here, we can search for books. We actually need to scroll. We need to keep on forgetting that. For example, Kotlin programming, we can click that. So we can completely freely use our apps. If you're actually having a normal Android app like here, this will work perfectly fine in home space mode without any further adjustment. Of course, it would need to be adjusted to also work on larger screens, on tablet screens, but that is independent of Android XR. But if you actually want to add these 3D and spatial capabilities to your Android app, then you need to use the XR framework explicitly and add that as an SDK reference to your version catalog in order to use that. That is what already happened here in this demo project, but just for little demonstration, if you go to your version catalog, you can see you have scene core and runtime. That is the Android XR runtime, as you can see, and the scene core is for 3D stuff, I think, and you can use these two dependencies, of course, to turn any Android project into an AR, VR project with Android XR. So I think this looks pretty promising. I am excited where this will go. If we take a look at Apple, they actually also announced and launched such a headset, the Apple Vision Pro, I think it was called, but they actually discontinued the support. So future will show what Google will make out of this. I personally don't have any friends who are using such headsets, such glasses on a daily basis. I don't even have friends who own such a headset. So it's definitely not that widespread at this point. And I'm at least skeptical whether this will be the future or not, especially because Apple discontinued the support, and there will be good reasons for that. So let's see, the future will show, but it's at least fun to develop for. And as I said, if you want me to make more dedicated, more detailed content about this, maybe how we can also render certain 3D models with animations in our augmented or virtual reality scene, then let me know that down below. And in the description, you will also find more advanced Android Premium courses on my website. So if you really want to get the skills that you need in 2025's Android industry, then get these courses, because they will really bring you there in the shortest possible time. Thanks so much for watching. I will see you back in the next video. Have an amazing rest of your week. Bye bye.